Reports this afternoon that a senior Hamas official believes a ceasefire could begin Friday. Now, earlier today, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, urging him to de-escalate the conflict substantially. Publicly, though, Netanyahu is vowing to continue the fight until Israel's security is restored.
There are only two ways that you can deal with them. You can either conquer them, and that's always an open possibility, or you can deter them. And we are engaged right now in forceful deterrence.
Israel bombarded parts of southern Gaza, targeting what it says are tunnels used by Hamas. Palestinian militants fired rockets at Israel, as did militants in Lebanon. Israel responded with artillery fire. The UN says nearly 450 buildings in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, including 6 hospitals. Gaza medical officials put the death toll at more than 225. Israel says at least 150 of those killed were militants, and 12 people have been killed in Israel. Now, what are the prospects for both a ceasefire and a lasting peace, given that this conflict is rooted in a dense historical context? We have a limited amount of time, but we do want to get the perspectives of both the Israeli and Palestinian delegations to Canada. And we begin with Hala Abu Hasirah, the chief representative of the Palestinian General Delegation to Canada. Ms. Abu Hasirah, we understand that there is the possibility of a ceasefire at this point, that the negotiations have been underway. What does it take to get to that point, just to stop these weeks of violence?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Very briefly, let me first put you in the context of what's happening. The Israeli aggression has been ongoing on the Palestinian people for the past 73 years since the Nakba. Last week, we did commemorate the 54th year of the Israeli military occupation of the Palestinian territory. Aggression has been taking place not only on the Gaza Strip, but also in East Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, on the holiest places for Christians and Muslims in the city. Attacks have been ongoing as well against the Palestinian people in the West Bank. Yesterday, only 4 were killed in the West Bank. In Gaza Strip, 227 Palestinians have been killed, including 64 children, 38 mothers, and 1,600 injured. What's happening is a violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. What's happening is a systematic attack by the different governments of Israel on the Palestinian people. A systematic policy of apartheid. I dare say we have to name things for what they are. A policy of discrimination and persecution. Mm-hmm. Today, the casualties, the killed, are beyond the count. We have stopped counting the killed because there are too many. We are seeing our children being killed, our mothers are being killed.
And Ms. Abu Hasirah, I do want to just jump in on you for a moment. Certainly the Human Rights Watch report that was released a few weeks ago used that term apartheid. There have been others certainly who reject that term. But I also want to look, I do just want to for a moment look at the role of Hamas in this, in attempting to get some sort of enduring longer-term agreement, and Hamas.
David.
Well, I would just ask, because Hamas, if I can, just for a moment, Hamas has a declared intent of destroying Israel. It's written down to slaughter the Jewish people. Is that not an impediment to some sort of longer-term agreement?
If we eliminate the Hamas right now from all of what's going on, if we neutralize what's happening right now, the Israeli attacks have never stopped against the Palestinian people. They have been ongoing. We have been witnessing for the past 2 months what was happening in East Jerusalem, and we were alerting the whole world on the gravity, on the consequences, devastating consequences that this could have on the Palestinian people, on the stability in the region. The aggressions have never stopped, neither in East Jerusalem nor against the besieged Gaza Strip since 15 years now. In the Gaza Strip, there's no water, there's no electricity, there's no security. Today in Gaza, every single Palestinian has become a target. Every single house has become a target. We are burying our children. We cannot protect our children. It's about time this aggression stops. It's about time a ceasefire takes place, an immediate ceasefire takes place to spare lives.
So how do we get to that? How do we get to that ceasefire?
Ceasefire, first of all, here we call on the international community, on the partners, on the friends of peace, on the friends of both people to take action. Declarations are not enough. We need an immediate action.
What kind of action? What specifically would you like to see from the international community? And I would ask about what specifically would you like to see from the Canadian government?
A lot of efforts are being put today from the international community, from the EU, from Canada, and I here welcome Prime Minister Trudeau call for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire. It is important to hold Israel accountable for its crimes against the Palestinian people. It's important Israel stops the occupation. Today we need a ceasefire, an immediate one, but a ceasefire followed by a real effort, a political effort to bring us to the table of negotiations, to launch an international conference where we finally can concretize the two-state solution, the very long-awaited two-state solution, and allow the establishment.
Can I ask you, is it also important for Hamas, you know, you talk about that the Israeli aggression, in your words, needs to stop. Is it also important, would you condemn the rocket attacks by Hamas, for instance? Is it critical for them to stop in an enduring way?
We are calling for a ceasefire, a mutual ceasefire immediately from all parts. We want to spare lives. We don't want our children to die. All of our children in the region, we want to be able to live in peace and stability, in peace and coexistence next to each other, but equally, with equal rights, with equal dignities.
Israel, Ms. Abu Hasirah, has maintained that there's sort of no equivalence between what they call the defensive actions that they're taking and those by Hamas militants who have this, as we were talking about, sort of stated goal of wiping the Jewish state off the map. Would you agree that there is not an equivalence?
There is no equivalence, I would say, between the aggressor and the aggressed, between the occupation and the occupied, between the attacker and the attacked, between the Israeli and the Palestinian right now. We cannot equalize between this huge, excessive use of force against civilians. We're burying our children. We're burying our children. We cannot equalize between the occupier and the occupied. It's about time the occupation, which is the main source of the whole issue here, the military occupation of the Palestinian territory. The Palestinians want to have the rights recognized. They want to be free. They want to be able to live and love as much as anyone else in the world. It's about time we reach this peace agreement, we reach the two-state solution, and to be able to live equally with equal rights together in this land.
Can I ask you briefly, you know, we're talking the big picture here, but of course you have relatives in the region. What's it like when you're calling home now?
It happens that I come from Gaza City and all of my family is in Gaza, and I thank you for asking the question. They are physically not dead yet, but I have to say what's happening in Gaza is it resembles an apocalypse. It's a devastation beyond imagination. Bombing is targeting civilians, children, whole families, is targeting the infrastructure, the medical infrastructure. The only COVID center in the Gaza Strip has been bombed. The offices of the Ministry of Health have been bombed. The roads leading to hospitals, to the central hospital in Gaza, has been bombed, and people don't have access to the hospital. The devastation is beyond imagination. it's people who are striving for their lives, for their kids' lives, seeing everyone shattered and scattered. There's no safe place in Gaza today. There's no safe building in Gaza today, and everyone has become a target. Not only the houses, not only the roads, but every single Palestinian has become a target in Palestine. And it's about time that the international community takes an immediate action. The Security Council has failed for the past 3 meetings that it conducted to even issue a statement asking for the aggression to stop. We hope a real effort will be put by the Friends of Peace, by Canada, and I call here upon Canada to use all of what it can do with the friends in the region, with Israel, to halt the aggression, to halt the massacre that is taking place,
And
to
Ms.
halt
Abu
the
Hasirah,
as well in Sheikh Jarrah, contrary to international law.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're just out of time here, but thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on the program.
Thank you so much, David.
Now, for the Israeli perspective, we're going to bring in Ohad Nakash Kaynar. He's the deputy head of mission at Israel's embassy in Ottawa. Mr. Kaynar, thank you very much for joining the program. There are reports out this afternoon that a ceasefire could potentially be imminent. What does it take to get to that point?
Well, at the moment, it seems as if a ceasefire is, at least in the Israeli perception, is at least 48 hours away at minimum, because the Hamas volleys of rockets have not ceased today. Nonetheless, there are a lot of efforts to reach a ceasefire, and hopefully they will be fruitful. The Israeli civilians as well as the Palestinian civilians deserve some calm, peace and quiet after 9 days of nonstop fire. Nonetheless, if a ceasefire is reached and it does not deal with the presence of Hamas and the hostility instigated by Hamas from the Gaza Strip, then we will just see this round of violence recur as it did 7 years ago and years before that. There needs to be a mechanism and insurances in place to make sure that Hamas cannot willy-nilly start firing into Israel.
Can I talk to you about the rockets? Because about 90% of those that are fired do get taken out by the Iron Dome, don't actually land in Israel. Some of them have landed, for instance, in the Gaza Strip. Some have hit targets, and people have died in attacks, certainly in Israel. But how do you draw a comparison between the sophistication of the Israeli military, which can take a building down, and what Hamas can pose as a threat?
Well, that's important to note, that we have the capability, but we don't use it at any opportunity that we have to take out a military target. A lot of times the targets are aborted. If we can't get citizens to move out, if the target is too high priority, then it will still get taken out, but we do our best to ensure that there is a minimum loss of human life. On the other hand, Hamas targets civilians from behind civilians. They are using their own population as human shields. We have shown many videos that show exactly where they fire from. There are also records on how they fired from UNRWA installations and other UN installations. They also don't discriminate when firing. They're extremely cynical, and they don't discriminate when firing on crossings that are trying to insert humanitarian aid, as happened yesterday, when they fired on a convoy of 60 trucks, allowing only 8 to reach Gaza, killing 2 civilians and injuring 10. So I really don't see a comparison. We try to surgically strike their infrastructure that is hidden behind their civilians, and they are targeting our civilians indiscriminately. Yes, 4,000 rockets, a lot of them land in Gaza because Hamas does not care about the human life of Palestinians. And yes, a majority of them are struck down by Iron Dome, and thank God for that. Because think about the price that would be in human lives, both on the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, if Iron Dome did not exist. We would have to go into a ground incursion into Gaza, and that would end in tens of thousands of lives lost on both sides.
I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment, only because you talk about you don't see a comparison, but I think the comparison that happens when people are in their homes watching this on screens is they see often the image of Palestinians as living in poor and suffering, and they see Israelis in a more advanced society with certainly greater military sophistication, and that, how does Israel deal with the fact that many people see something that is not seemingly a fight between equals?
Well, it isn't a fight between equals. It's a Palestinian terror organization recognized in Canada, Hamas, and a sovereign country being fired upon. Canada is a part of the global fight against terrorism, and so Canada is a like-minded state that also fights terrorism as it occurs. I think a lot of Canadians need to think about that, about how they would react if rockets were raining down on Ottawa, for example, or Toronto. I don't think they would expect their military to sit back and do nothing, but to have protection. And I'll add to that, the cynicism of Hamas has been ongoing since 2006. They took over the Gaza Strip. There's been no elections there. They've done nothing to further the lives of Palestinians. They often utilize humanitarian aid sent into the Gaza Strip to build terror tunnels, to build their own infrastructure to fire at Israel. The solution, or whatever ceasefire occurs, the solution needs to be that which will remove Hamas from the Palestinians' lives in Gaza as well. It's not only us that are suffering from Hamas, it's also them.
You speak about elections. How do you respond to concerns that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not been able to form a government after 4 elections, is perhaps likely to benefit politically from what is happening now?
I don't think anybody benefits from what's happening now, not on our side, not on the Palestinian side. I think the only ones benefiting are outside of Israel and the Palestinian territories, and that's Iran, who clearly backs Hamas and instigated this round of violence. I'm sure you followed also 4 rockets were fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah towards Israel today. And so a clear hand of Iran is there, but nobody else benefits from this. An ongoing round of violence where people die, nobody benefits from this, not Prime Minister Netanyahu, not Mahmoud Abbas, not the heads of Hamas, just Iran.
So what is the end game here? I mean, we are headed perhaps towards some ceasefire now, whether it's 24 or 48 or 72 hours from now. And yet then we go back to something that doesn't still seem normal even after all of these decades. What is the end game?
If I were, privy to what the end game would be, I would be happy to try and solve the crisis. This is an ongoing crisis that's been around before I was born. I'm 42 years old. I've managed to seen governments come and go, Palestinian leaderships come and go, less often, and the solution has not presented itself. We've been through this through the Oslo Accords. We've been through this through the American attempts at peace, and sadly, we never found a Palestinian partner willing to negotiate and finalize a good solution for both sides. Our hand is always extended for peace.
Do you see that? I mean, as you say, as long as you've been alive, this has been going on. Do you see this being resolved within your lifetime?
I really hope so. I have 2 young girls. When I talk to them, we talk about how peace can occur and how we hope for it. I'm sure Palestinians do the same with their children. The radicals that are in places of influence, such as Hamas leaders, are doing their best to destroy that hope. Hopefully, we will eventually find a way to do it. But it needs assurances. There needs to be more than a Band-Aid solution. We can't do round after round of violence. They can't keep stockpiling arms in the Gaza Strip, and we can't go back to them firing willy-nilly whenever they want to.
Can I just finish off by asking you, we're talking big picture here, but I recognize there's the smaller picture. You would certainly have family in Israel. When you're calling home, talking to them, how are they?
I have a 94-year-old grandfather who can't move his legs, and to think that he needs to be shuffled over to a bomb shelter every time there's a siren breaks my heart. But this is the same story for every Israeli and a lot of Palestinians as well. The suffering is immense, and I truly hope we get to a place where both the Palestinians and the Israelis have this alleviated, and that goes through removal of Hamas from the Gaza Strip.
Mr. Kaynar, thank you very much for joining the program.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.